Hello and welcome to Lightways at Life Astrologer with me, Anna Isabel. And I welcome my guest today, who is John Wadsworth. And I came across John when I was reading through some um, old booklets from the Astrological Lodge of London. And there his article was. And I also since discovered that he has a great book called Your Zodiac Soul. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction, Anna. Yeah, it's very nice to be here.
It's wonderful to have found you, and particularly because I was looking through just some of the old newsletters and things from the Astrological Lodge of London, and the quarterly particularly. That's what I was looking at, and there I found your article, and I thought, now this is good. I like this. So here you are, and your book is called Your Zodiac Soul. And I actually am just going to read the very first thing that I read in it, which I thought was poetic and beautiful. There is a wheel turning in you. It is a wheel of time and a wheel of initiation. It is a wheel of lived experience that is reflected in the cyclical passage of the seasons and in the play of light and shadow that conditions and shapes your life. It is your own personal imprint of the wheel of star constellations that turn around you every day. It is the wheel of your zodiac soul. And how could anyone resist reading a book that begins like that?
Yeah, I worked. I thought a lot about. I think the way a book begins is very important. You know, the first line or the first paragraph is very important. So I
I
put a lot of
just
thought into it. Yeah.
really resonated with it. There's something very poetic about it, but that completely encapsulates the poetry of the relationship between the individual and that moment in time in which we are born.
Mm.
So tell us how you see that link between chart and soul.
Good question. Thank you. Um, well, I mean, I think you've touched on the essence of what astrology means to me. It's a poetics of the soul, and I think when we engage with the symbolism of astrology in that way, it allows us to deepen into who we are in, beyond personality, beyond the, you know, beyond the more superficial aspects of identity and into something that increase, the deeper we go, more and more it starts to resonate with something that draws us into relationship or draws us into the memory of how we are always and already related to one another. And that's a very important idea for me, is that we are not, although it seems like we're born into the world as separate entities, because I mean, you come in and there's this huge trauma at birth, right? And we come in and you know, it's like it obliterates all of that soul memory that we will have accumulated over many lifetimes. And we think we're alone in the world. And I think one of the ways that our awareness matures over a lifetime is this growing realization that we are always related and always have been from the beginning. And I think I talk about this actually in the Libra chapter of the book, which is that realization, that kind of counterbalance to Aries, which is that primal scream of birth, to that realization of our relatedness. And I think that's where as I talk about it in the second half of the wheel, where we start to, every sign starts to become becomes the opposite of the one previously encountered in the first half of the season and the first half of the year of the wheel. Then we start to realize you know, this relatedness and how the soul really, as we get deeper in touch with our soul, we get deeper in touch with how connected we are.
I like that. And it is something, it is, I think, one of the more beautiful aspects of the zodiac itself is seeing that progression from one to two to all to one.
Yeah.
And I've always, thought that that was magical. It's the story, isn't it, of a soul's discovery of itself,
Mm.
the zodiac. So
Mm.
just again that sense of going from feeling alone and perhaps delighting in that to suddenly being discovering, relating, and then ultimately the connection as you and interconnectedness as you have talked about. That's the wheel itself. How do you see that in terms of the individual? So you're looking at a chart, and how do you connect that journey into the individual?
Mm. And the beautiful thing about a chart is that it's like it gives us this unique constellation of astrological positions and signatures that gives us this sense of uniqueness. And yet it contains within it all 12 of the zodiac signs, right? We have all 12 of them within us. It contains all of the planets and it contains all of the houses. And that's because I'm interested in what I'm interested in that tension or that juxtaposition between what draws us together and what connects us together and how we can recognize what we all share as a common heritage and what it is, that unique piece that breaks out of that in a way and then needs to work through its own individual karma or its own individual expression in some way. And I think astrology handles that beautifully. I think a chart really expresses that very beautifully. Because the way that I've written my book is based on this idea that we carry all 12 of these deep images, these deep metaphors, these deep figures, these deep stories, multi-layered. We carry them all within us. And that if we can really enter into each one of them and understand how we're related to them. And if we do that by following the order of the seasons and the year, or just following this order that unfolds, because I'm interested in how one sign sort of moves to the next. You'll notice in my book that each chapter begins by talking about the transition from one sign to the next. The Taurus chapter begins by talking about the transition from Aries to Taurus and how we make that transition, which you wouldn't normally see in an astrology book about the zodiac because the signs are being treated as sort of discrete characteristics or traits or whatever. So, I'm really treating the zodiac as a journey in that way. And, it's a different thing when you're looking at a chart because you're really focusing on what it is that makes that person unique in a way, but you're always calling up like deep archetypes, whether that's the archetypes of the planets or these, increasingly I talk about the zodiac signs as kind of as medicines for the soul. That each and that can be a bitter medicine sometimes as well. And then maybe it may be that we're expressing more of the shadow aspect of that sign in our lives. But when we bring it to awareness, we can find where the balance, we can start to find where the balance is in each one. So that's really, and in a way, my work on the zodiac is is different in some sense to the way that I work with clients, of course. But I find myself always calling up aspects of it when it's needed. If I'm, and it might be because a particular planet really needs attention. And it may be that that planet in its sign position really needs attention. And then I'll call up, and I'll still work with this idea that there's some medicine that is being sought out in that person's soul. And of course the chart can help to identify what that is. But that's a very different thing, isn't it, from looking at a chart as a sort of as a determined or fatalistic sort of, you know, roadmap of this is going to happen and then, or this is who you are. When I'm teaching, when I'm working, because I run a school called the Kairos School, and one of the things I often say is that the things that we're traditionally supposed to be able to do as astrologers is predict the future, give advice, and sort of define characteristics of personality. And I actually think that one of our roles as astrologers, if we're working, really deeply with, and therapeutically, is to actually resist the temptation to define those three things in any absolute way, and to hold the tension between the sense of there being a destiny, but also of our participation within that. And that I think an astrological consultation can be like a turning point. It's where we can start to participate, where you can encourage and invite the person to start to participate with their own destiny, and then it becomes, for me, really potent.
There's so many things in what you've just said, and the participation is clearly key to personal growth, because it's about that interaction or engagement with the dynamic energy of the self, but also with the soul. And the image that I had a few images whilst I was listening to you, but I suddenly saw this book, and the book consisted of charts, and each of them a chart for different lifetimes. So if you're thinking about the story of the soul, this book is the story of the soul, and all that's in the book is the chart for each incarnation, each moment of birth. And of course, there's still lots of empty pages to come, because there are many lifetimes to come. And that made me then think of it as a chart indicating where the soul is on its journey of understanding the connectedness. So it was just interesting that as I was listening to you, that's what came to mind. And it's not an unfamiliar concept to me, but suddenly it was so, in the image, it was so crystallized and clear. And it made me think about how much I love that approach to it. So let's talk about the chart then, because we're looking at each of the signs, and the signs have the archetype and the mythology around them. But as we know, although we have all of them within the chart, some of them are going to be more emphasized than others. And some planets are going to be more highlighted than others, as you've already said. So if we just look at that question, where am I on this journey of remembering connectedness? Where would you begin to look?
I mean, as you were talking about this book of charts with all your lives, I was thinking about the nodal axis, of course, and which for me would draw together themes that have ways in which certain lessons have had to be learned many times over many lives and have kind of crystallized around a particular sign or a particular house, and that gives us a way in to that question of where at least the themes that are carrying the person on. I'm also be interested in the ascendant, in the nature of the ascendant, what's breaking through. Because for me, that what's written on our face through the ascendant. I mean, you look into the eyes of the soul, right, on the face, and there's something in that. That's why sometimes we get an imprint of, you know, I think a deep truth. I think that the ascendant reveals in the first impression a deep truth about the nature of the person's soul journey. It's like you can't get away from it. It's like it's written on your face. I often say that with the ascendant. It's written on your face. You can't talk your way out of it. Well, you can try, and of course we tend to do that. We tend to talk our way, and then. But it's amazing how often we come back to the first impression and go, oh, that was the first impression that I had of that person. That's exactly what and it turns out to be the case. And I think there's something about that, there's that thing that can't lie, which is so imminent in our being, that first interface that we have with the world. In the same way that that's a place I would look in terms of what the soul is looking to bring through. I'd want to understand the nature of the moon position, of course, because that's loaded with memory. I always think the moon carries more recent memory than the nodes. The node is more like ancient memory, long-term soul memory. So I'd look at that. I mean, there's a way that I would render all of the planets in a way as different aspects of the karmic story or the karmic journey. I don't know if that's what you're asking, but I mean, that's where I kind of, yeah, that's what's
No, it is.
taking
It
me.
is
Yeah.
absolutely what I'm asking. And I'm with you on the nodes being a really great starting point.
Mm.
And when you were talking about the ascendant, I was just thinking about how important it is because obviously it marks the moment of incarnation.
Mm.
But I was also thinking about, when you were saying that you can't hide it, you can't talk your way out of it. And it made me think about how many people out there spend vast amounts of time, energy, and often money trying to change their appearance and the
Yeah.
way that they look. And wearing my therapist's hat, how often I have the conversation that goes along the lines of, well, it's really not about the way that you look, is it? It's more about how you feel about yourself, and you're fixating on your appearance because
Mm.
you don't have this good relationship with yourself. Obviously, I
And your appearance in that sense is directly linked to your relationship with yourself, isn't it? And that's a very interesting kind of way of understanding the ascendant and the first house, that our appearance and the image that we have of ourself are so connected, right? Mm.
completely, and I find this particularly in adolescent and teenage girls, but it is definitely present in all ages and both sexes. But that fixation with appearance and not looking acceptable
Mm.
to to oneself, looking in the mirror and being horrified. I think it's so much deeper than not look liking the way that we look,
Yeah.
because I think that that is a complete rejection of the self.
Mm.
It doesn't get more personal than that. And so yes, that's the conversation then, is to, gently hold the mirror up and go, is it really about your appearance, or is there something else that you're not happy about? Because I've been listening to you for the last half hour talk about yourself in a very negative way. So
Mm.
is it really the appearance?
Mm.
And it's just teasing that out very gently to help people see that this isn't so much about what's on the surface. It's about the relationship they have at a deep level within themselves. So I listening to you, that's what came to mind, and I think you're absolutely right. I think you're right. The moon is more about recent memory. But do you mean, just for clarification for everyone listening, do you mean it's recent memory because it's linked with the immediate childhood, or do you mean that it's recent memory in terms of past lives?
Yeah, maybe both. I mean, it's interesting is that the moon rules the limbic system of the brain. You know, that first thing that comes online when we're born, where that capacity that we have to form memories and experience emotion. It's the first, it's the primary way that we're kind of made from first, sort of the autonomous nervous system. I mean, the moon in a way governs all of those functions that happen automatically within the body without us having to think about them, all that instinctual memory that we have that is just there. We don't, and I think the nature of the moon's position can show the ways in which that, you know, the imprint that comes in that first moment is imprinted some very, perhaps, whether it's recent in terms of time or just recent in terms of the power of its impression from the power of a previous incarnation that has impressed itself upon us so strongly that we come in and immediately the way that we, the way that we form memory is somehow strongly impregnated with that energy that sign or that aspect that it might have sort of carries. Yeah, that's kind of the way I see it. So I think the earliest way that we form memories and that we you know feel feel safe. I mean, it's about feeling safe, the moon ultimately, isn't it? It governs everything that's familiar, most familiar, in a way that is totally pre-cognitive or pre-verbal, really. It's sort of so I think there's a connection there between first impression of life. In a way, that's your first impression of your life, isn't it? The first experience of your life. It's like the moon. It's like, it just, it first organ that comes online, the first memory, the most powerful memory that's coming through from the past.
Well, it's very interesting that you're talking about it in that way as the first memory, because I always associate the ascendant with the moment of birth.
Yeah,
But
same.
then, it really is that first memory. And in fact, I've recently interviewed for another channel a woman who is doing some wonderful work um, with regards to what happens in the womb and in the birth process. In fact, there's a couple I've interviewed on this subject, and it very much links in with some of the um, hypnotherapy work that I've done,
Mm.
um, where clients do recall their time in the womb or the birth, and where there's been trauma. So I think it's interesting, because then that begs the question: if we're seeing the moon as some, and that instinct as something that we are born with, where does the first nurturing experience and mothering fit in?
Yeah, that's good. That's interesting, isn't it? Because the first nurture, I wouldn't associate the first nurturing experience with the ascendant. I associate ascendant, and I would link it with Aries in this sense, with the passion of birth. you know, which is also, you could say, is the trauma of birth as well, right? It's just loaded with the intensity of that moment where we have to break through from one reality into another, you know, and I think it shows up every time we start anything new, every time we meet anybody new, that birth moment reawakens in us. Every time we begin anything, even every time we begin the day, we wake up and like, in some sense, we're being born again, aren't we? Every time we wake up in the morning. So the way that we do that probably is conditioned as well by the ascendant and that relationship that we have, you know. Whereas I suppose with the moon, and maybe I'm linking this now to Cancer in the fourth house as well, you know, I think of that, I would associate that with the first nurturing experience. And I would associate that also with origin. So I think the first house for me is birth and the fourth house is origin. And they sound a bit similar, don't they? But they're not, because birth is the fire of the full experience of becoming alive or being alive or changing the state of aliveness into your first breath in this world. And then the fourth house and Cancer and the moon being all about the origin story, maybe the memory of where we come from, including the memory in the womb.
Birth is definitely that, and it's that the cutting of the umbilical cord in a very physical way. It is that moment when you are no longer in this physically symbiotic relationship anymore. You are now separate.
Yeah.
And that's the trauma of being separate. Not to say that every birth is traumatic. By no means is that true. And working in hypnobirthing, I know that does not necessarily need to be true. But there are nevertheless many birth stories that are traumatic. And we know that there is a difference between babies who are born in a very relaxed way and babies who are born in a very traumatic way. So many studies have shown that babies that are born in a relaxed way cry less, sleep better, are comfortable, are happy, and then that's really important. And those first moments of birth, where if, as happens in most cases these days, children are no longer born at home, they're born in hospital, and they're taken from the mother immediately. You compare that with birth experiences where the baby is not taken away from mother and is placed on the mother's body, skin on skin, and how much more comfortable and in fact healthy that baby is in the first few months. And you can see how incredibly important that is. And it brings me to mind, it brings back to, I'll remember this story, I think, forever. But I was doing a workshop on the Ascendant and the birth experience. And there was a woman, I believe, this was years ago now, but I do think it was a Pluto conjunction to the Ascendant. Or perhaps it was Uranus. It may have been both, actually. And she was talking about how all of her life, she would be ready to go to start something. And then suddenly it would all stop and she could never seem to get started. It was like the efforts were aborted just as she was ready to launch. And in the workshop, she suddenly made a connection. And the connection was this, that she was born quite suddenly in, I think, en route to somewhere in public transport. And somebody said to her mother, well, you've just got to close your legs. And so it was this, and I just thought, wow, I mean, tell me there isn't a connection between a baby that's, ready to emerge and the message is, no, you can't come out yet. It's not convenient.
Go back in. Yeah.
Get back in there.
It's not your time. Yeah.
It's not, So, and that memory just stuck with me because it is probably one of the most direct links I have heard expressed before an attitude to initiating things, as you were talking about, and the actual birth experience.
That's brilliant. Yeah, 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 yeah.
So
And then the astrology just supports that as well, of course, doesn't it? The Pluto Uranus on the ascendant. Probably if she's born in the mid-60s, she'd have that conjunction. Wow.
yeah,
It's a good story. Yeah.
and there's plenty more
Mm.
out there that I have heard in through various workshops and things. Um, and if you speak to people who are working with birth experiences, and there's the trauma too, that link between trauma for the mother giving birth, and either through exhaustion or trauma itself, finding it difficult to connect with the baby.
Mm.
And I don't know how many times I've heard women say, I just couldn't connect, and feeling guilty. And I'm thinking, well, of course you couldn't connect. You were exhausted.
Mm.
Didn't mean you didn't love your baby. You were just, there was nothing left. You're just exhausted. Or it's basically suffering from PTSD.
Mm.
So what you say there, it really rings true.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. At the moment, I'm taking a group of 12 people through a 12-month process, following the principles in the book. So each month we meet one-to-one, and we work through all the seasonal cues and all of the inquiries associated with that sign and with that part of the year. So, so we follow it as the sun is in that sign. And we're working exactly with this at the moment, of course, because we're in Aries and we're starting. So yeah, so we've been asking those questions. We've been looking specifically at that relationship between how we begin and the situation of our birth, and whether exploring whether there's a connection, looking at the chart as well to see what the connections are, but also how we access passion. This is why I was saying about this experience of passion, which of course originally meant suffering. It was associated with Christ's passion on the cross, right? So we don't think of passion in terms of suffering now. We think about what gets us excited and what we love, but actually it also comes out of a longing, which I think is connected to the separation of birth, the separation from the mother, even if it's done, even if it's experienced in this more relaxed way that you're describing. There's still a separation that has to happen inevitably. The umbilical cord is cut and we're separated. And how is our passion, which is also the in a way the call to adventure, isn't it? It's the beginning of the life's adventure, comes with this moment, through this moment of separation where we go, hey, I'm an individual, I'm a separate being, and I have to then make my own way. And so in a way we have to find our own way. We have to find out who we are. And then maybe gradually over life we start to remember, you know, that we're actually still connected in some way.
But passion does involve pain. So the passion of discovering who you are by its very nature is going to mean separateness, at least for a time, and the need to stand on your own two feet. And I'm just thinking about the different phases in life in which we begin to assert independence.
Mm.
So, what are the terrible twos about? It's about the child, beginning to want to assert some independence, the angst of adolescence and, the teenage years. What's that about? The next stage of wanting to separate from parents or be distinct from the parents in the discovery of who I am in relation to parents. Later on, the next milestones of going out into the adult world on our own, those tentative steps that I call baby adulthood. It's all of that is can feel very alone and very lonely and painful. And it's only when we begin to feel that we know who we are and can connect with others that that begins to be assuaged. But then comes the relating bit and
Mm,
sorting out what's you, what's me, um, and that can bring pain. So I think there is very much a link between
mm.
passion and pain, as you've said.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that Aries energy that is all about, just that heat of the moment when everything is now, because there's nothing before it and there's nothing after it. It's just what's happened. If it's not as it should be now, then that's like, what do we do? There's no, and it's that immediate and that urgent and that kind of imminent. And at some deep level, Aries also represents the connection to God, to the divine in its purest original state as well. I think, and that's very strong. And then I think it's not. And then and I talk about this in the book, how it's then we kind of step down into the body in a way, and we come into the senses from being this just pure existence in Aries. We sort of land in the body, in the senses, in Taurus, and then we just drop into that. Everything's about the touch and the smell and how things look and feel and all of that, and then because we'd moved in the season then from the bud bursting out on the branch to the blossom, which just fills our senses. And then Gemini comes with the wind and changes everything. It blows the blossom away, and the bees and the butterflies and the pollinators come in and they stir everything up, and they bring this excitement of change and language forms at this stage. So I mean, I think plotting. I spent many years kind of plotting this correspondence between the way we develop as human, in our human development, and the way and how that can be seen to be paralleled in the seasons. And those first three signs particularly fit particularly well: the bud, the blossom, and the bees, the pollinators. And then you look at the 12 Christian festivals, and you realize, oh my God, they're astrological festivals. They all Pentecost, which always happens in Gemini when Christ comes as a holy wind and fills the minds of the apostles so that they can speak in tongues. I mean, and he says, go out and spread the word, spread the good news. I mean, it's thoroughly Geminian, isn't it? And you can actually track that all the way through. And it's fascinating that you realize that and then I love that, because then you realize that the astrological, what's carried through the astrological tradition is actually embedded into all these different, particularly in the Western religious traditions. It kind of, you can find similar themes in other religious systems too. Yeah.
Wonderful. Tell us more about the work that you're doing and how and this process of your book. So how do you do that?
I've done it in different ways over the years. For many years, I ran a group in Glastonbury. It was called The Alchemical Journey. It was actually before I wrote the book. The book came out of it, but where we would meet every month while the sun was in that sign, and we would just soak ourselves in the imagery, in the myths, in the alchemical processes, in all we'd find all these different ways that this 12-fold wheel would express itself in life. The body parts, all, and then we would play games, and I'd devise exercises and games that would just help us to access that astrological energy of that sign. And then we'd actually go and walk in the Glastonbury Zodiac, which is a landscape zodiac. I don't know if you've heard of the Glastonbury Zodiac, but it's a landscape zodiac of these images that were kind of discovered about 100 years ago, and they're sort of in the land, and these giant effigies made by streams and old trackways and contours of hills that make the figures of the zodiac in a 12-mile circle close to Glastonbury, around Glastonbury. So we would go and then walk in the land as a way, so as a way of kind of pilgrimaging into this, into the energy of the sign and looking for the, finding the synchronicities in there. So that was how I worked with it for a long time. But I also, even prior to that and since, I've also worked with the Zodiac with people one to one, where we can really sort of look at somebody's life through these 12 different stages. I call it 12 gateways to wholeness, which is what I wanted for the subtitle of my book, and I fought with Orion Books to get that subtitle, but it didn't have enough keywords in it for Google, so I wasn't allowed to have it. And funnily enough, she said, "We can't have that because people don't know what wholeness is." And I said, "Well, if they don't know what wholeness is, then we really do need it, don't we? Surely." But of course,
That's good. Very
yeah,
strong arguments to have it.
yeah. Because I love the word wholeness, because, and I love what Jung said about wholeness as well, and how he differentiated it from the idea of perfection, almost as if perfection was the thing that could get in the way of wholeness, the striving for perfection. Whereas wholeness is, where with wholeness, it's a remembering, or it's a relaxing into, or it's a recovering of the experience which is always there. You haven't got to strive or make it better. It just is. And I love that about the Zodiac, because it's a mandala of the soul, and somehow it contains all of our life experiences, or it can be imagined to contain them all in ways that seem very faithful to the symbolism. And so, yeah, so to enter into each of the signs of the wheel, particularly if you can do it as the sun is traveling through the year, as I like to do it, because then you've got all the seasonal cues. It's brilliant. You can go out and smell the blossom in Taurus. You can, you can feel the dark, you can feel the darkness coming in like a cloak in Scorpio. You can really feel the energy of the season. You can feel that you can get in touch with the quickening of the light in Aquarius at Imbolc, and then to be able to experience that mirrored in your own life, and just inquire into, all these different inquiries open up, different questions that we can ask ourselves. And it's not like just an arbitrary 12-part process, because you're being given it by the astrology, you're being given it by the season. It feels like you're not having to work it out, because you're being shown it, which requires you to listen more deeply and observe more deeply what's actually changing in the shifting of light and dark. And one of the ways that I love to describe the signs is in terms of the shifting of light and dark in the year. Because one of the things that I realized when I was researching deeply into the zodiac is that each sign actually expresses a different relationship between light and dark. And there were 12. There were 12 of them. There were 12 ways of describing the way that relationship between light and dark shifts. And when I realized that was beautiful, because it was, yeah, it just, and then that opens up, and you start to get a sense of why the tropical zodiac is tied to the equinoxes and solstices. Because if it isn't, you kind of lose that in the season. And I'm a huge defender of the tropical zodiac for that reason, because for me, it maintains the ceremonial integrity of the wheel.
Completely, because the symbolism is totally and utterly connected with the seasons.
It really is.
If we separate that, it makes no sense anymore. So I love the idea of the mandala of the soul. I love that. And I think I shall end this conversation allowing everyone to ponder on the beauty of that image, the zodiac being the mandala of the soul. And I believe that's Teddy, my dog. So I'm just going to say that again. Teddy, darling, can you wait a moment, please? Just wait a minute. Let me finish off. Okay? He's been very patient. I've asked him to wait about twice, just with the hand signal. So Anyway, I shall let everybody ponder on that beautiful image of the zodiac as a mandala of the soul. John, thank you so much for your time today. Please tell everyone um, how they can find you.
I have a website which is www.kairosastrology.co.uk. That's Kairos, Kairos, for sugar, astrology.co.uk. I run a 2-year training foundation course and a diploma course, accredited training, which goes into the second year of which goes into practice. It really goes into the ethics of actually practicing as an astrologer. Because that's what that's where the process leads for those that want to follow that. I do consultations and coaching. I also lead tours as well. I lead tours in Egypt and in Glastonbury. So yeah, but it's all up there on the website.
Fantastic. I'll put a link to it in the description box along with the link to your book. Thank you so much, John.
Pleasure.
And thank you all for watching. Until next time, just remember to have a look in the description box for the information that we've just given, along with my own website and link to Substack. Until then, goodbye.